Hello friends, in the last lecture we discussed some definitions of novel form. Today we are going to discuss elements of novel, and in this particular lecture we will be discussing plot, character and point of view. Obviously there are more than that to the elements of novel, but for our convenience we will be discussing these three important aspects of the genre in this lecture. Let's first discuss this particular word elements. You may know that elements mean the basic parts out of which anything takes shape. So without these elements, without most of these elements, novel cannot take shape, and therefore they are called elements. As I said, we will be discussing three very vital elements, very important elements of the genre: plot, character and point of view. See, this is the definition and description of plot. We will first read this definition, which I have taken from the book Understanding Unsins, and then we will discuss it at length. So, plot in the novel. Plot does not restrict only to the genre of novel, but novel, short stories, drama, all of them have some plots. So what is this plot? Plot is a carefully thought out plan. Please pay your attention to these bold words or phrases. Plot is a carefully thought out plan in which all the events, all the actions and reactions of the characters contribute toward the forward movement of the story. The story then moves on, carrying on the reader with up and over a series of ups and downs until the climax of the story is reached and everything is resolved. This type of well worked out and carefully arranged plan is called the plot of the novel. So, again, we will discuss this definition. Plot is a careful thought out plan. So when novelist or a story writer thinks about his piece of writing, he plans. So it is a carefully thought out plan in which all the events, what are the aspects or what are the ingredients of plot? All the events, all the actions and reactions of the characters. Thought out plan in which all the events, the things that happen in the novel, right? Whatever happens in the novel, that is called events. So all the events, all the actions and reactions, not only actions, but after the action, their reactions of the characters. Events and actions and reactions of the characters contribute toward the forward movement of the story. So we will discuss this once again. Basically it is a very carefully thought out, carefully arranged plan in which, in this particular plan, the events and actions and reactions of the characters contribute toward the forward movement of the story. The story then moves on because of the actions and reactions and events. The story moves on, the story progresses. The story then moves on, carrying on the reader with up and over a series of ups and downs. Ups and downs means the story the story takes shape because of several events. Some of them may be common events, some of them may be very significant events regarding the characters. So, over a series of ups and downs until the climax of the story is reached. As we are going to see in the next slide, climax is the highest point, the most important point in the novel. Climax of the story is reached, and after the climax, everything gets resolved. The conflict in the novel, what is the conflict? We are going to see that as well afterwards. So, everything is resolved. This type of well worked out, well thought out, well worked out, and carefully arranged plan is called the plot of the novel. When an architect makes a plan, you just visualize that particular plan of a house. Suppose if you want to make a plan of your future house, if you want to build a house, what will you do? On the paper, you will draw a particular plan and you will see that my bedroom will be here, my study will be here, and so on and so forth. As you draw a particular structure on the paper of your future house, in the same way, the novelist kind of makes this plan of the novel for the novel. Right, I hope you have understood this definition. Now see, here you can see this particular graph like image on the screen. This is about the plot structure. We discussed right now plot and the events and actions and characters. So usually this kind of plot structure, usually I am saying not always, but usually most of the times, this kind of plot structure can be observed in any novel. See here, this is exposition. What is an exposition? At the base, if you see this line, this is exposition. So exposition is an introduction. Introduction to the main characters in the novel. At the same time, the theme of the novel, and at the same time, the important conflict, that is the conflict between opposite forces. The problem, we can say the problem of the novel, because of which the novel becomes interesting to the readers. So, the exposition is nothing but the introduction to the characters, conflict, and somewhat, to some extent, theme of the novel. So, this exposition takes place in the beginning of the novel, say first and second chapter, 1 or 2 chapters. Then if you see this line, rising action, which is going high, which is going up, this rising, what is this rising action? The events take place in such a way, actions take place in such a way that the novel, the plot of the novel progresses because of such actions. That's why if you see this line, it is a rising action. It rises. Those actions take place in such a way that plot progresses. And therefore, it is called rising action. Maybe the protagonist or the main character act in such a way that some events take place, or vice versa, some events take place that affect the characters, and the conflict and the theme is developed in this particular portion of the novel, right? The theme gets developed in the rising action because of the action. At the same time, the conflict also develops. The conflict, that is, as I told, the opposition between two forces, that becomes intense. And after this rising action, this action reaches at the highest point in the novel. That is called, this highest point is called climax of the novel. Climax means the most important, most critical, or the highest point in the plot of the novel. Because of this rising action, because of these many events and actions and reactions of the characters, the plot reaches its highest point, that is climax. At the climax, there is conflict at its top. The conflict either gets resolved here or it remains the same. After this highest point, there is falling action. Falling action means there are certain events. Now see this line, length of this line. This length of the falling action is much shorter than the rising action, because rising action takes most of the space in the novel. Most of the length of the novel is taken up by the rising action. Climax takes place, climax happens almost at the end of the novel. Therefore, rising action, this line is much longer. Almost at the end of the novel, climax takes place. Then in the following hardly one or two chapters, this falling action, because after the climax, that action takes place, and that is why it is called falling action. And therefore, after the falling action, the complete resolution at the very end of the novel, the complete resolution of the conflict in the novel occurs, it takes place. So this is usually, as you can see here, the common plot structure. Usually, exposition is introduction to the characters and the main conflict. Due to the conflict, the action reaches the climax, here rising action, and then the resolution of the conflict takes place. Okay. Here is another description of the plot. The plot is important to a novel as the skeleton is important to human body. Please try to understand this comparison. It underlines the significance of the plot to any novel. It says that the plot is important to a novel like or as the skeleton is important to human body. Without the skeleton, we are just kind of a heap of flesh and bones. If those bones are not connected to each other, and if they do not make a particular structure, we are just a heap of flesh and bones. Therefore, the skeleton is important to a human body. In the same way, the plot is important to a novel. Okay. A plot is a selection of events. The novelist does not put all the events in the novel. No. He does not describe or narrate all the actions, all the events of any character. It is not simply possible. He cannot narrate what the character does right from the morning to the evening. That will be difficult as well as ridiculous, and the novel will become very boring. Therefore, the plot is a selection of events arranged in time. Arranged in time. This is also very important. One reason why we go on reading a novel, it makes this particular thing makes the novel interesting. It has causality. The causality word has been created out of Cause, C-A-U-S-E. What is the causality? One thing leads to another. Something happens which is the cause, and as its effect, the next thing takes place. As we have studied in history, that so and so, something and something happened, and therefore the next event took place in the history. The causes and effects of World War One, right? So something happened, and because of that, the next events happen. In the same way, this causality must be followed in any novel. So what is causality? Cause and effect. Something happens, because of that, the next thing takes place. So one thing leads to another. A plot has another important thing. A plot has a beginning that leads through a middle, and through the middle, the beginning that leads through a middle to an end. So these three important elements of the plots are significant to note: beginning, middle, and an end. So this particular thing, this particular beginning, middle, and end, it makes some kind of pattern. What is the pattern? The probability must appear not only in events. Now you must understand this word probability. It is synonymous, almost similar to possibility. But what can happen is possibility, what may happen is probability. Right? So it is possible for you to get a job, but it may not be always probable for you to select that job. Right? So that is the probability. The probability must appear not only in events, but their sequence. This word sequence has again come up. The sequence of events in a novel. So in the beginning there is introduction or exposition. After the introduction of the characters, the conflict develops, the conflict takes place and it develops. After the conflict develops, the actions take turn in such a way that they reach a climax, and after the climax, there is the resolution of the conflict, not the other way around. Unless and until the themes and the conflict and the characters are introduced or are exposed in the initial chapters of the novel, the reader will find himself confused. Therefore, this probability in the events is important. The plot is a structure. The plot is a structure through which the novelist handles. What does, as I told, that it is a plan, it is a structure. The plot is a structure through which the novelist handles themes, characters, time, and verisimilitude. Verisimilitude means semblance, similarity to real life. Again, I read that particular sentence. The plot is a structure through which the novelist handles. What does he put in this particular structure called plot? Or what does he handle? He handles themes, the central ideas, upon which his characters and actions are based. So he handles themes, characters, time, and obviously, as we discussed in the definition of novel, there must be some kind of verisimilitude, that is semblance or similarity to real life. In this particular slide, we can see that there is differentiation or distinction between story and plot. We'll just focus on this. We'll try to understand the difference between story and plot, because we confuse while speaking or while writing, we confuse between these two. Right? So we can define story as narrative of events. Narrative of events. What is a narrative? Narrative is sequence of events. This happened, then that happened, then that happened. So that is narrative of events. The action in particular sequence is narrated. So we can define story as a narrative of events arranged in a time sequence. This time sequence is important in a story. A plot is also a narrative of events. No issue. A plot is also a narrative of events, but here in the plot, the emphasis falling on causality, the cause and effect manner. The definition of plot, at the same time, the basic difference between story and plot gets clear from the following example. These two sentences give it out very clearly. The king died and then the queen died. The word then is again in the bold. The king died and then the queen died. So what happened? First the king died and after that the queen died. And therefore it is just a sequence of events. Chronologically, it becomes a story. This sentence tells you a story. But then how it is different from plot, or how plot is different from this? The next sentence is, the king died and the queen died of grief. So the king died becomes the cause, and because of the grief, because of the sorrow of the death of the king, the queen also passed away. So now you must have understood this basic difference between plot and story. The next very important element of the novel is character. What are the characters? Characters are the persons represented in a dramatic or narrative work. Characters are the persons, people shown in, represented in a dramatic or narrative work who are interpreted by the reader. Obviously, when we read a story, when we read a novel, or when we read a drama, we try to interpret those persons as we try to interpret persons in real life. So as readers, they are interpreted by the reader as possessing particular moral, intellectual and emotional qualities. We understand, we interpret that these persons, that is characters, have certain moral, intellectual and emotional qualities. But how do we know these qualities? Because these qualities are revealed by what they say and their distinctive way of saying it. So from their words, from their dialogue, what these characters say and how they say it is called dialogue, and what they do, we know about their moral, intellectual and emotional qualities by their dialogue, and what they do, that is their action. So these two elements, again dialogue and action, have been also kind of defined here. The reasons for characters' temperament, that is their nature. The reasons for characters' temperament, desires and moral nature, as well as for their speech and actions, are called their motivations. Why do they behave? Why they are as they are? Why do they behave in particular manner? Why do they desire in particular way? Why do they behave morally or immorally? Why do they speak in such a way? Why do they act in such a way, particular way? It is called their motivation. A popular novelist, E.M. Forster, in his book Aspects of The novel, published in 1927, introduced these terms. These terms were new then, right? In 1927, he introduced these new terms by distinguishing between flat and round characters. You will say, sir, what is this flat and what is a round character, right? Because immediately when we say flat and round, the shapes emerge, the shapes come in front of our eyes. But it is not exactly like the shape. Obviously, the name is very significant here, suggestive here. A flat character is built around a single idea or quality. I read it again. A flat character is built around a single idea or quality and is presented without much individualizing details. The flat character does not show many individualizing details, many moral qualities, or many aspects, right, of his personality, his or her personality. So, presented without much individualizing details and can be described in a single phrase or sentence. Such a flat character is a simple character and can be described in a single phrase or sentence. For example, in the last year you have studied Rabindranath Tagore's The Homecoming. In that, the protagonist is Pathik and his uncle. We can just in a single sentence say that Pathik's uncle was a kind-hearted person because his actions or his reactions do not reveal many individualizing detail of that character. Generally, not always, but generally minor characters are flat. Obviously, there are some protagonists or major characters, they can also be flat, but generally speaking, minor characters are flat. In contrast to the flat character, a round character is complex in temperament. Flat character is very simple in nature, but round character is complex in temperament and motivation. And such a character is represented in the novel with subtle details. Subtle details means very minute details, very small details. Such a character, therefore, is therefore difficult to describe because it is complex in temperament, because it has been shown with subtle details of its personality, and therefore such a character is difficult to describe like a person in real life. And as we see, a real person is capable to surprise us. The people that come in our life and go from our life, they surprise, they are capable of surprising us. Their actions surprise us, sometimes shock us. In the same way, the round character is capable of surprising us. Why they are round characters again? Why they are complex? One of the reasons is round characters undergo a change. They undergo a change through various situations in the plot. Generally, in the course of the novel, these characters undergo different experiences that change their personality. As we undergo various experiences, good and bad, ups and downs of our life, these characters are also shown to undergo different experiences that change their personality, attitude, and perspective. Therefore, they emerge as evolved persons at the end of the novel, developed person at the end of the novel. My Son's Story is a novel by Nadine Gordimer, and Will, the 14-year-old boy, he undergoes so many experiences that he is completely a changed person at the end of the novel. He somehow is a witness to his father's affair to another woman. He is also a witness to the revolution against apartheid in South Africa. And therefore, he becomes around character. He undergoes changes, he witnesses so many things, and his personality, attitudes, and perspective changes. Here is the next kind of or next type of character, which itself is called a type. A character that stands as a representative of a particular socio-cultural or economic class. I read it again, a character that stands as that represents a particular socio-cultural or economic class of people is called as a type. Again, I go back to the last year's syllabus of compulsory English, in which Rosemary Fell in Cup of Tea by Catherine Mansfield is a type representing rich people. She is a type character because she represents rich people. Right? Therefore, she can be called a type character. Now here you say other categories, that is protagonist and antagonist. Protagonist was traditionally called as the hero, but now it is called the protagonist, who is the central character in the novel, and around such character all the actions and events in the plot revolve. Whatever this central character called protagonist does, everything happens around him. Because of his actions, other actions take place. Right? Generally now, the term hero is not used, because in the Greek tragedies or even in the Shakespearean drama, the hero had a very different characteristics. But now it is called simply as protagonist, that is the central character. Against the protagonist there is antagonist. Antagonist, who is an antagonist? Traditionally known as a villain. For example, Shylock in Merchant of Venice, The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare, is known as a villain, right? So traditionally known as a villain, the character that acts opposite, contrary to the motives of the protagonist, is an antagonist. I am deliberately, purposefully giving you the example from Merchant of Venice. Shylock does everything to spite, to go opposite to Antonio and Bassanio. Obviously, we know the other reasons, socio-cultural reasons, but he can be called an antagonist in the novel. I hope you have understood the concept of plot as well as different types of characters. Now we are moving towards a very important concept of novel, in the elements of novel, that is point of view. Try to understand this point of view is in some way similar to, but in many ways different from our real life point of view. The point of view signifies the way a story gets told. The mode or modes established by an author to present the character, dialogue, action, settings, and events which constitute the narrative in a work of fiction. Let's discuss this concept. Point of view. The point of view signifies the way a story gets told. We have seen that novel is a narrative in prose fiction. So a novel is basically a narrative. It means someone narrates the story. Someone tells what is happening. That someone who tells the story, who narrates the events, actions, is called a narrator. And how the narrator tells the story, the way the narrator tells the story, narrates the story, is called the point of view. So, the point of view signifies the way a story gets told, the mode or modes established by an author. Every novelist uses a particular method established by himself or a traditional mode established by an author to present. What does he present through this way of telling the story? He presents the character. Obviously, he presents dialogues, actions, settings. That is where the story, time and place of the story, right? So, settings and events which constitute the narrative in a work of fiction. So, we have already seen that character, dialogue, action, setting and events, they make up the narrative in a work of fiction. And this narrative, how it gets told, how it is presented, the way it gets presented is called the point of view in the novel. Once we have understood this basic concept or definition of the point of view, then we will move on to the types, the three major types of point of view. That is third person point of view, which is the most common in novels, the first person point of view, and a very rare point of view, that is the second person point of view. Okay. So the first type is third person point of view. In this particular mode, the narrator is someone outside the story and refers to all the characters in the story by name or as he, she or they. See, when we talk about others, when we are not telling about ourselves, we use third person, right? In the same way, here the narrator is not inside the story, he is not a participant in the story, he is outside the story and refers to all the characters in the story by name or as he, she or they, right? Again, in the third person point of view, there are certain types. There are little bit differentiations in the third person, how the story gets told by the third person narrator. The first type of third person point of view is the omniscient point of view. Let's concentrate on this word, omniscient. Omniscient means one who knows all. So we always call God as omniscient, knowing all, one who knows all. And such a narrator in omniscient point of view is just like a God. How? We will see. This is a common term for many work of fiction written. I'm sorry, this word has been typed as written instead of WRITTEN. Written according to the conventions, written according to traditions. The narrator knows everything about like God, as I said, like God, he is omniscient, he or she is omniscient. The narrator knows everything about the characters, actions and events. Characters, actions and events. Such a narrator also knows characters, their thoughts, feelings and motives. So as we believe that God knows everything, here the third person omniscient point of view's narrator knows character, their thoughts, their feelings, motives and is free to move in time and place in the novel. Such narrator can talk about the past, the present and sometimes even the future. And At the same time, because he is not the participant or character in the novel, he can freely move from one place to another. To shift from, he is again free to shift from character to character and to report or conceal their speech. He can report their dialogues, he can talk, he can tell what they are talking about. At the same time, he can hide what they speak. Doings, their actions, and most importantly, he also talks about their state of consciousness. See, this particular cartoon very clearly tells you the third person omniscient. See here, suppose this is the narrator. So he knows about all these people, their thoughts, what they speak, what they do, because kind of from above he is looking at them. He knows everything. The next type in the third person narrator or third person point of view is an intrusive narrator. Intrusive, someone who intrudes, who comes in between, who makes his presence felt. So intrusive narrator is the omniscient narrator, who not only reports, not only knows, but he also comments or evaluates or judges the actions and motives of the character, and sometimes expresses personal views about human life in general. Novels of Henry Fielding, Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, Dostoevsky, Leo Tolstoy, all these novels have such intrusive narrator. Try to understand this. For example, while talking about a particular character, say that character's name is Ajay, the narrator will comment that Ajay's move or Ajay's decision to leave the job was unfortunate. Here, the narrator will not only describe his action, but he will say that it was unfortunate because it is a comment, and that's why such a narrator is called an intrusive narrator. I hope this gets clear. The next type of third person narrator is limited point of view. Here, the narrator tells the story in the third person, but stays inside the confines of what is perceived, thought, remembered, and felt by a single character, or at the most by very few characters within the story. So, though this point of view or this narrator is a third person narrator, but unlike the third person omniscient point of view, here such narrator knows the thoughts and actions of only a single character, or at the most one or two characters. Henry James refined this narrative mode, an American novelist, described such a selected character whose thoughts and whose action gets represented by this limited point of view as his focus or mirror or center of consciousness. That is the novelist, such a character is focus of a novelist. It is a mirror of the novelist, or it is the center of consciousness. Milan Kundera, a Czech novelist, right, or from Czech Republic, who also writes in Czech as well as in French. This particular novelist, Milan Kundera, in his novel Immortality, uses this mode, this particular limited point of view, by presenting the character of Agnes, who becomes the consciousness, who becomes a focus of the novelist. The next point of view is objective point of view. Next type is objective point of view. As the title or the name suggests, sometimes a third person narrator doesn't enter even a single mind or not even a single mind, but records only what happens. Try to understand this. Like a camera, right? It is also called a camera. So sometimes a third person narrator doesn't enter even a single mind of a character, even a single character's mind, but records only what happens. Such a point of view is called the objective point of view. It is also called a fly on the wall, since it's passive and complete objectivity. So this objective point of view is also called a fly on the wall, as if a fly is sitting on the wall and observing everything. In such a way, such point of view works. Such narrator in objective point of view does not comment on any action, nor he knows the mind of or thoughts and feelings of any character, but it tells us, it narrates what just happens. Therefore, this narrative is also called, this point of view is also called a fly on the wall, since it's passive and completely objective. The next point of view is first person point of view. I. The narrator calls himself as I in the novel. In this mode, the narrator speaks as I and to a greater or lesser degree is a participant in the story. Here, the narrator is also a character, either major or minor, in the story, in the novel. Therefore, he or she is a participant in the story. This mode, this particular mode of the first person point of view, if carried out consistently, limits the matter of narrative to what the first person narrator knows, experiences, infers, or finds out by talking to other characters. This is because this limits the matter of narrative to what first person narrates, knows, experiences, infers, or finds out, because it is limited to only one character, that is the first person point of view. The first person point of view cannot be omniscient. Please remember this, right? So again, there are certain benefits of first person narrative as well, as there can be some doubts because only we know from the point of view of only one person what is happening in the novel. At the same time, that unlike the third person, that person witnesses everything, it also becomes, the narrator also becomes credible, right? See this particular cartoon, first person, right? Here, this character is participant in the story and he or she will tell about what he or she has witnessed, right? Now, there are certain subtypes in the first person narrator, right? Though they need not be named differently, but yes, there are certain, we can distinguish between these first person narrators. We distinguish between the narrator I, who is only witness and auditor of the matter he relates. So he is not a participant in the action, but he is just a witness, an auditor. That is, he has just listened to those events, right? Marlowe, for example, Marlowe in Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad is such a character. He only tells what he has listened from other characters about the protagonist, that is Mr. Coots. Or the first person narrator can be a participant, but only a minor one in the story. For example, in the famous novel Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, Nellie Dean is a governess and she is not a major character but only a minor character, and she tells the story of the protagonists, that is Heathcliff and Catherine. Or such a first person narrator, the first person narrator can himself or herself be the central character in the story, that is the protagonist of the story. For example, Will in Mason's story by Nadine Gordimer, Mersault in The Outsider by Albert Camus. This novel opens with his shocking utterance, that is, mother died today or maybe yesterday, I am not sure. And from this very opening line, that mother, his own mother, he is not sure whether she died yesterday or today, shocks the reader, and this particular character, the first person narrator, grips the reader with interest, shock, surprise. Then there is very famous character Holden Caulfield in J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. In this particular very famous American novel, The Catcher in the Rye, this Holden Caulfield starts with, I am not going to tell about my story like a shit, I'm sorry for the word, but like the crab in David Copperfield. And as he refers to David Copperfield, in the novel David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, David's story starts with the chapter I am born. Okay, so there can be the certain different types of the first person narrator, right? Now we move to the next narrator, next point of view, which is quite rare, that is the second person point of view. This name has been given to mode in which the story gets told, at least primarily as an address by the narrator to someone he calls by the second person pronoun you. So as in real life we call someone as you when we talk to someone as you are a smart boy, in the same way the second person type of point of view is a type in which the story gets told, at least initially, as an address by the narrator to someone he calls by the second person pronoun you, who is represented as experiencing that which is narrated. This form of narration has been used rarely in the 20th century. This second person may be, who is this second person narrator? It may be a specific fictional character in the novel itself, or it can be the reader of the story, or even the narrator himself or herself. For example, in Daddy Longlegs by John Webster, in which narrative takes place only through the letters between a girl and her benefactor. So it is a series of letters, and obviously therefore the second person point of view is used throughout the novel. Okay, so here we stop our lecture, here we stop our discussion. In this particular discussion we talked about plot, the various definitions and description and importance of plot structure. We also talked about the concept of character and its types. We talked about flat character, round character, type, protagonist and antagonist. And we also talked about the three major types of point of view, that is the first person point of view, third person point of view and second person point of view. In the next lecture, we will talk about other elements of the novel. Thank you very much.